I'm far away from home. It will take me like a day and a half to get back home. But still, there are aspects of my culture that I see here, that I find here. And that's something you start learning once you get to spend a long time in the place.
Welcome to the VentureEtte podcast, where women from all over the world share their stories of travel, moving abroad, and creating a new life for themselves, hoping to inspire you to live out your dreams by showing you how other women did it. I'm your host, VentureEtte, Ashley. Hello, and welcome to another episode of VentureEtte podcast. I'm Ashley, and I am so thankful to have you here with me today. It truly means so much. I love sitting down and having these conversations with these strong and beautiful women and listening to their stories. So I hope you do too. With today's guest, I'm very excited to share with you all because she has gotten to live and explore a part of the world that I'm still very curious about, which is Africa. She's originally from Colombia, but she grew up traveling around Colombia a lot with her family. So she's always had this adventurous spirit. It wasn't until she was older she realized that she really wanted to travel a lot more outside her country and potentially move abroad. But because she is a single mother, she decided to put off this idea for a while. Firstly, because she wanted her son to grow up for a while in Colombia in order for him to be in touch with his Colombian roots. But also she wanted to wait for him to be a little older so that it'd be a little easier to travel, as I've heard that traveling with young children can be quite difficult. So once he was a bit older, she finally decided to take the plunge and move to Gabon, Africa. And while Gabon is an oil producing country, it isn't as rich as one might think. So when she moved there, she really had to adjust to living in a place where it wasn't extremely rich and also live in a country where her color of skin was completely different from everyone else. And also living in a country where woman isn't necessarily seen as completely equal. Though while there were all these differences at first, over the course of the 3 years that she was there, she started to see more and more of the similarities that her home country of Colombia and many parts of Africa have. And you'll later hear in the interview that things that she thought were from Colombia actually came from parts of Africa. And so while she was seeing more and more of the similarities, she eventually developed this really deep connection with the land, the culture, and the people in Gabon and other parts of Africa that it actually ended up being quite emotional when she finally had to leave. So welcome, Dyana.
Hi, Ashley. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Great.
So I know that you are in Hanoi, Vietnam right now. So how many years have you been abroad now?
My first experience abroad started by June 2016. So that makes it already 4 years and a half.
Oh, wow. And did you see yourself being abroad this long when you first moved?
Absolutely. Yes.
Okay. I totally get it. Sometimes when you know, you know. But, originally you're from Colombia. What part of Colombia are you from?
I was born and raised in Bogota, the capital.
Okay. And Colombia, it's still one of the places that I need to go. But how was growing up in Bogota?
Well, I have to say that although I enjoy traveling a lot and learning from other places, for me, Bogota has a special place in my heart that will never change. I will constantly feel this idea of going back home, and I love it. I think I had a great childhood, and my teenagers were also pretty cool. Even though I lived through different historical moments that were quite significant for the country, for us as a culture, and that, of course, shaped a lot of what I am right now. But my life in Colombia was great. I grew up being an only child for almost 10 years, quite spoiled, I have to say, because I was the only child from both sides of the family. So what I remember from my childhood is my parents were very young when I was born, and I was raised with this idea of being open-minded and being interested in culture. So I was this kind of kid that would start having dancing lessons from a very early age. I think I was 5 or something when I started. um, at the time I was dancing also. My parents used to work in a bar at night, and I was constantly exposed to different cultural movements in Bogota. So I had the possibility of witnessing how some Colombian bands were formed and created and their first performances. So I think I was in an environment that made me quite interested in the cultural movement in general. And also, I would say the idea of traveling was given to me by my parents. It was very common for us to travel around Colombia. I managed to get to know many different places in the country. Still, I don't know it all, but I did travel a lot when I was a kid, and they were quite adventurous. So that kind of gave me the idea of, wow, we need to travel, we need to go. It's so fun to go and do it and explore and get to see other things and learn and get involved with the people and the culture and all that. Of course, I also have to say that growing up in Colombia made me witness some other processes that were not perhaps very nice to witness. I There is a great memory I have. Well, I would not say great, but a significant memory I have. When I was a kid, my dad was taking me to school, and we needed to walk through one of the main avenues in the city. And I saw how military tanks were heading to the Justice Palace when it was occupied by a guerrilla group. And I remember that image. I remember holding my dad's hand and seeing the tank right in front of my eyes, and that of course has or had a great impact in the way I would see all the process that Colombia has been through. And of course it makes me stand a lot for how important it is for our country to change those those ideas that were given to us by some Colombians that clearly do not represent what we are as people and as a culture.
That's very interesting that, even though there was, all these significant events that happened in Colombia, you and your family, that didn't give you guys any fear in order to like travel. Like you still were open-minded, you still wanted to go out and explore. You didn't let fear overtake you guys. And I think that's very important because I feel like that definitely really did kind of help shape you into the woman you are today, not letting fear overtake you and like stopping you from wanting you want to do in your life. So it seems that you were living and growing up there when there was a lot of conflict in Colombia, and so when there was that conflict going on, I mean, how was your day to day for you and your family at the time?
Well, when the Justice Palace event happened, we were actually living in the area, not exactly. It was a walkable distance, a bit far from it, but I remember I could hear the bumps, for example. That is a memory that I have from my early childhood, and I still remember that. And later on in my teenage ages, I remember in my teenage years, I remember, for example, not being allowed to go out because we never knew when a bomb was going to explode in the city. There was the moment in which the Medellin cartel was bombing everywhere, every place, and that was quite dangerous. That was complicated times, I would have to say. My parents would tell us, okay, there's no possibility you go out. There's no way you're going to do it. So unfortunately, that was it was complicated. I also remember that there was a moment in which the government had to regulate how people were using motorbikes, because you know that normally people would be assassinated by criminals riding a motorbike. So there was a special regulation that there could be only one person in a motorbike. So every time you would hear a motorbike, you would go like, okay, something might happen. Although it was times in which we did experience fear, I would say that I never regretted the fact of being born in Colombia. It happened to some of my friends. I can remember people saying, "Ugh, why was I born here? I wouldn't like to be Colombian. I wouldn't like to be living here." I never had the feeling. I never had that idea on my mind. I think it was also because my parents made an effort to teach me how valuable my culture is. Colombia, many people don't know this, but Colombia is a very diverse country. You can find anything in Colombia. There's many things that people, when you travel around, people go like they they're really surprised by things, and then I think to myself, well, I've seen this before, even since I was little, because we're really diverse in everything, in climate, in geography, in people, in culture, in food. So I think that my parents kind of compensated that with nice experiences that would enhance the love that I felt for my country. And no matter where I go, I'm always proudly Colombian. And I think that's something I also have worked very hard to leave my child to learn that too. He feels and he sees himself as a Colombian. We are critical, of course, of what happens, but we never stop loving our country.
I love that. I really love that. Despite that there was, like, conflict and everything in your country, that doesn't take away from your pride of your country. And I think that's very important because it just kind of sounds like everything that happened has really just kind of shaped your outlook on life. And so I guess because there was that conflict, what do you think was the biggest takeaway from you because of those significant events that happened in Colombia?
I would say that that has given me and most of Colombians resilience. If that is something that something positive I can take from that is we are resilient as a people. You rarely see a Colombian who gives up easily on something. We always try to find our ways to do it, and I think that experience gave me that, and also that experience has shown me that violence is it doesn't bring any good, and that there is a deep need for all humans around the world to work out their emotions, to work on their on how they see the other person or other individuals, and how they interact in different situations. Because unfortunately, yes, as a country and as a culture, violence has affected us, has affected the way we see the world, the way we see other people also. Um, but I would say that it has mainly developed a sense of resilience in ourselves, and of course in myself.
I think that's very beautifully said. And yeah, I think those kind of conflicts, it does bring resilience because no matter what, you are going to continue and push through and live your life, the best way that you can. And so, how old were you when the conflict, finally ended in Colombia?
The That's one of my critical points. I feel the conflict has not ended at all. The thing is, there's been some steps that have been taken, and that shows progress. Of course, what has happened is that the situation has become a bit more friendly, I would say. The fact that we don't have any more fears in terms of bombs exploding around or things like that. I will not say the conflict has ended. I think it has transformed. It has mutated into other forms. We don't see it in the cities anymore, but you can actually see it in little towns and those rural areas. Conflict is still an issue. However, I think it was like about I would say 13 more or less when the situation stabilized a bit more and the bombing thing and the hitman situation stopped. So then nowadays is completely different. Perhaps teenagers at this moment in Colombia don't understand that because they've never been through it. But yeah, it was like about 13 more or less when that situation stopped. It basically stopped when Pablo Escobar was assassinated. That was basically the moment in which it stopped. Again, it mutated into other forms of violence and crime, and that was the case in Bogota because My understanding, because I have friends in Medellin, I've never lived in Medellin, but my understanding was that once that happened, the situation became less hostile, but still was present in the city, and some areas of the city were still saying how little leaders or like middle leaders in the organization were trying to take over the others, etc., etc.
Okay. That's very interesting just because and I wasn't aware, so thank you so much for explaining that there is still like, conflict, but like you said it's transformed and it's in more of like the smaller towns because over the years I've met other Colombians, but like I know more people that have traveled to Colombia and from my understanding I just felt like it was now safer, to go there because I thought that it had ended. So that it's really eye-opening to know that it has transformed now and you still I guess need to be cautious, but I guess more so in the smaller towns or just in other parts of Colombia. So thank you so much for explaining that. So like you said, the conflict in terms of the bombings and everything ended around when you were around 13. So is that when you started to kind of travel around Colombia with your family? I mean, once that kind of conflict ended, what did you start doing, especially with your family?
Well, we even when the bombing and everything happened, we used to travel. Maybe not that often, but still we did it. But yes, after that happened, we started traveling. I remember going to the north coast, which is well, that was something that we would usually do, going to places like Santa Marta, Cartagena. We also traveled. My father, my dad, he has relatives in the Pacific coast, which is completely different from the Caribbean coast in Colombia. So we used to go to cities like Cali and some towns in the Valle del Cauca region, which is a region where it's all like this culture of salsa, and the area in the country where they used to produce sugar, and all that culture also has a special vibe. So we used to go there, and we used to go also to like little towns or little cities that are small cities that we find around Bogota, Girardot, different other different places. I would also travel to the area where my mother's family is from, that is Boyacá, which is like an area where most of the peasants in Colombia are located. It's a cold area with mountains and everything, so we would also go there because you knew that no one was going to stop you on the road, for example. I also visited Medellin. Later in life, I traveled to La Guajira, which is the northernmost area in Colombia. Beautiful. It has a desert. It has the beach. It has indigenous population.
It seems like, yeah, like you said, you pretty much went everywhere. So, because you traveled a lot with your family and even though there was conflict and stuff, did you ever feel like a need that you kind of wanted to go outside of Colombia when you were growing up, or did you feel like you wanted to, stay in Colombia, as soon as you, finished school and whatnot?
I think I inherited that from my mom. She always wanted to explore the world. In fact, she did. I remember when I was like about 17, she said, "You know what? I'm going to travel around Europe for 3 months." And she decided to go right in the moment where there was this huge winter wave. So she faced the coldest winter like in 20 years. There she was. So my parents had this idea of traveling and taught us about traveling and about exploring since I was very little. So it was always on my mind. I always wanted to travel. I remember my first abroad experience was going to Aruba. My parents said, "Okay, what would you like for that Latino culture? We celebrate the well, I don't know. In Colombia, we celebrate when a girl gets 15.
Yeah, a quinceañera, yes.
Yes, they
Yes.
party and everything. I was never that type. Again, my parents were quite different from most of the standards. So I told them, listen, I'm not going to spend all that money on a party. that is going to be for most of the people, I want to spend it on a trip. And I chose Aruba because I was obsessed by that. When I was like 7 years old, my parents went to Aruba and they didn't take me. So I was obsessed with that. And I said, I'm going to go to Aruba. So that was my first abroad experience. And I loved it. I loved it. It was, we were staying with a family that is a friend of ours as well. And one of them was telling my mom, it's incredible, but she moves like she's in her element. She doesn't seem to feel like scared about being in another place. She would go out. She doesn't care if she doesn't speak the language. She just out she goes, and she's free to do it. So I think it was something that it was always on my mind. I always wanted to travel. I always wanted to live abroad. Much that I love Colombia, but I wanted to have that experience. To me, that was like, there's so much to see and explore that I want to do it, and I want to witness it with my own eyes. So the idea was always there.
I get it. It was the same for me as well. Like, it was like my first abroad experience. I was like 13. I went to Quebec with my French class, and there I just thought, wow, this is so different and so beautiful. I want more of it. So I understand that once you get that feeling once, it's you want to have that feeling again. So that was your first abroad experience, and like you said, you really wanted to explore more. So when was it when you found the opportunity to eventually move to Central Africa? Because you said, you're a teacher and that you were teaching at an international school for quite a few years in Colombia before you moved abroad.
Yes. So well, after I got graduated from uni, my child was born. He's not a child anymore. He's already almost an adult. But for that reason, that the idea of traveling or moving abroad kind of got stuck in the moment, and the reason behind that was that as a mother, I'm a single mother, so I was able to handle and make a decision on the type of education I wanted to give my child. I didn't need to negotiate or try to see if it was going to be that way or not. So, but something that was really important for me was I wanted him to grow up with his culture. I didn't want him to, because I did have the opportunity of moving when he was little, when he was like about 5 years old. One of my uncles, he owns a company in Colombia, and he was trying to open a branch in China. And since I already spoke English and I was quite fluent, he said, I trust you as the person I should send there to lead the company. So that for me, that was two ideas on my mind. And it was first of all moving abroad, and the second was changing my career path. But I thought to myself, do I really want my son to grow in another area that is far from his culture, that he's not going to remember many aspects? He was already uh, starting his bilingual education because he speaks English since practically since he was born. So then I said, no, that's something I don't want for my child. I want him to be truly Colombian, and I want him to understand his culture, to learn the language, to learn many different aspects. So for that reason, I kind of postponed the idea. But then when I started, as you mentioned it, I started working at an international school. And because of my career path, I always ended up working with expat teachers. I was never part of the local staff, but of the expat staff, and they all talked about how they had traveled and experienced and all that. And I kept thinking, I wish I could do it. I don't know. Maybe I was busy with other things in life, and I thought I was not going to be able to experience the same. The fact that I work in an environment that it's mainly for native English speakers also made me a bit scared of not finding the opportunity, because of course I'm a native Spanish speaker teaching a subject that is mainly given to native English speakers. So I thought to myself, that's lots of competition. There's lots of other people around the world that might get the job and I might not. But there was this Venezuelan coworker of mine. He's a very good friend of mine, not a coworker anymore. And he started pushing me, like, listen, you need to travel abroad. You need to have the taste and get the experience. And I was like, forget it. I'm not going to get a job. They're not going to take me. I'm Latina. Come on, they're not going to accept me. And he was like, why not do it, do it. So he started pushing, pushing, pushing. And my boss at the time, he was a British guy. When I told him about it, he said, yes, go for it, we're going to do it, and if you need references. So they all supported me so much that I said, okay, let's give it a try. So I started applying for jobs at international schools. I had different interviews. Some of them were nice, but I was not really convinced until the African opportunity appeared. And I loved the school from the very beginning. I loved the idea of the school. I really liked it. And I remembered at that point that my friend had a friend of his. He had moved to Africa right after he got graduated from university. He was a civil engineer, and he started working in Africa. And every time he would come pay us a visit, I would ask him, how's life in Africa? I was always like so interested and attracted to it. So I looked at the package the school offered me, and I said, why not? I would say now I'm a risk taker. But I think at the moment I was not aware of the huge leap I was taking. A friend of mine had told me, "You need to do it. That's a leap of faith. Moving abroad, it's a leap of faith, but you're strong, Diana. You can do it." When I told him where I had moved, he said, "Girl, you really took a leap. That was really far." So I decided to take the job, and off I went to a country that, although it is in Central Africa, which is a very, very complicated area too, it's pretty stable. And I lived there for 3 years.
Yes, you said you mentioned to you went to Gabon, which from what I understand is that it's like the fifth largest oil producing country in Africa. So it's actually quite a wealthy country. So how was that adjustment from going from Colombia, to Gabon?
Well, first of all, since it was my first experience abroad, I can tell you that packing all my life in Colombia was traumatic because I was basically dismantling my whole life. And that's the moment in which I started thinking, wow, what I'm doing is serious. This is not a vacation trip. This is not me going out on a holiday and coming back in 2 weeks. This is definite. But anyway, I was decided, and I was my mind was set for that. So then I did it. It took me like 2 days and a half to get to my final destination. I was exhausted. It was not my first time traveling abroad. It was not my son's first time traveling abroad, so we already knew like part of the drill. However, the trip was very long. First, I traveled to Brazil. I spent 12 hours there. Then another stop in South Africa, 8 hours and a half there. By that moment, we were already smashed. We could barely stay awake. And then from there to Gabon,
And how old was your son at the time when you moved together?
12.
Okay. Yeah, so definitely not very little, but almost a teenager. So makes it easier to travel. I have relatives who have younger children, and I know that's a bit difficult. So at least he was, old enough, and I'm sure that made it a easier transition as well, even though it was a very long flight.
And as a mother, I have to tell you, I made the right decision because that has taught him a lot. And for me, he's not only my son, like, that relationship of authority, mother and son, but when we travel, he's my partner. So he has been great company during all my trips, and I never felt that. Of course, you always have this responsibility as a parent, like you are the person who's in charge of that other person, but he is all the time so keen to help, to do it. Whenever I might forget something, he's on top of it, like, hey, don't forget this, we need to do this, blah blah blah. So it with him, he became a company for me, right? So I think it was the right decision, and he was in the perfect age for me to do it, because that also changed him a lot. It's incredible to see how much he changed, and he even senses the change on him. If you ask him, he's going to tell you, the way I see the world is completely different now. Sometimes he even experiences that he's a lot different from his friends in Colombia. Sometimes I feel they don't get my point. And I tell him, yeah, that's pretty normal, because the fact that you're moving around and you're changing, it's different. Their process is different. It's also quite, it's okay. I mean, it's a choice of life, but it's different. It makes you different.
Exactly. It does. I mean, once you move even just once, your perspective completely changes. And especially like at such a young age. So I totally, understand where, you kind of struggle to relate, to your friends back home who haven't moved around as much. And that's totally fine. It's okay. It's just, different perspectives and different views on how you see things in life. So, but I'm glad that it was a positive experience for him and also for you as well. So you move there together and you have your son who's great company. How is adjusting to living in a completely different culture?
It was challenging, I have to say. I would say that normally when you talk to expat teachers who have traveled to different places, the process usually is gradual, in the sense that they start moving from their original countries to countries that are kind of similar, and little by little they transition into a completely different experience. And I have to say, I did completely the opposite. Normally, people would end up in Africa after some years of traveling abroad. No, this girl, she went completely different. I went right to it, which I don't regret at all. It was hard. Some of the aspects that were very difficult had to do with the cultural shock. One of the biggest issues is that the perspective that societies have about women in Africa is different from the perspective I had in Colombia. I'm not going to say that women are not given their role, because African women are empowered, but the way in which they are empowered is different. It's something that we don't have that much in other parts of the world, because women in Africa are powerful, and they do get to make their own choices in certain things only. Gabon is a country that is, if you ask many African people, they all go like, why Gabon? Gabon is so different from the rest of Africa. And I have to concur with that, because I also traveled to South Africa, to Senegal, and to Sao Tome and Principe. So you can tell that there is a difference. However, for example, something I had to do, which was never common practice in my country, was I had to find a driver who would take me places where I wanted to go. And if I was not with my son, he would have to go with me. It was not it's not that they're going to do something bad to you, but it's better for a single woman to avoid being around on her own. And especially because, of course, I'm clearly not from the country, so I am easily spotted. That was one thing. The second thing was the fact that it was to me the first time I was going to face discrimination because of not being from the same racial type. It, being a Colombian, I have a combination of different features. So I'm more leaning towards like the Arab type, and they respect the Arab people there. So they didn't do certain things to me, but I heard how they were rough to, for example, people who are white and they have like their color, their hair color is also light color. In my case, I did experience things. I was, to me, that was shocking. It was the first time in my life I experienced something like that. But at the same time, I kind of understand them. I would say that something that I get from living in Africa is sometimes you see how their emotions, even though many of those processes ended long time ago and even centuries ago, you can sense the resentment sometimes in their expression. Sometimes for them it's really difficult to relate to other people, to people who represent the white power. It's complicated for them. And that was something I had never witnessed. So seeing it is, it's different than reading about it on an article or in a documentary. It's completely different because then you're living with them.
That's just very interesting that you say that because, right now I'm back in the US and there's a lot of conflict right now with racism. There is just some unfortunate, just kind of racial discrimination and events that have happened. And just kind of hearing what you were saying about how you can see it on their expression, like even, in a country like Gabon, about like the resentment that they might have towards like, certain people. It's just very, I don't know, not interesting, but it's just kind of sad to see that there's still that resentment to this day, even though for you it was a few years ago that happened. I mean, it's something that's still ongoing today, especially like here, like in America. But I totally get it. Like you see it and then you feel it and then it's like you're like living with it. So I feel like what you experience is definitely very powerful and should be shared, that you should be able to see and understand the pain or the resentment or all these like feelings that these people have, because it's still significant to this day.
And they do, they, once they get to know you and they become more open to you, the ideas or the feelings they express, you can see like, wow, it's difficult for them. If you ask them, they always feel that there's something related to discrimination behind. Maybe the young generations, they and the more contact they have with the rest of the world, they kind of lose that part. But when it comes to adults and certain groups of people, it's a complicated situation with them. Actually, to me, it was really funny that the kids will tell me one day, Miss, but the thing is, here you're white. And I was telling them, I'm not white. How can you tell me I'm white? Look at me. I'm a combination of colors. I have no color. And then they would say, yes, Miss, but here you're white. I was like, oh my God. I was never labeled or tagged by anyone in my country. So even in my case, in my family, my dad would call me negrita, but that's out of love, that's a love expression. You can't do that there. You just can't do it. It's simply not acceptable.
No, it's just funny that you say that because, I experienced something like that. It was actually even here in the US many years ago that, someone called me, white. And like you said, like, I have tan skin, I'm Mexican, but at that time, I guess it was like slightly lighter. And so to them, it was just like, it was white. And like you, I was like, what? I'm not white, I'm Latina, I'm Mexican, but it's just because our shade of skin is just so much lighter compared to theirs. It's to them we're like, I guess, white, but it just kind of shows like the perspective. It's all about perspective. In some parts of the world you might be seen as, like Latina, or when I was living in Hanoi, people thought I was from India, which I'm not.
Same here.
Yeah, it's really just kind of all about perspective and what you grow up with and what you know. And that's how like people tend to label other people like, oh, you're white, you're Latina, or you're from India, or you're from wherever. So it's unique that called white there as well, because I've been called white too, even though my skin is also darker than a regular white person. So it, yeah, I find it just very interesting just to learn people's perspective of what people think you are based on what you look like.
However, the experience, people normally ask me, what was it like to live in Africa? And for me as a person, I also have to say it was an an introspective journey to my identity. Why? You know, Colombia and all Latin America, we're all mixed. There's always different elements in our cultures that come from different parts of the world. So we either have, depending on the country, we either have like certain Spanish roots and all that. But of course, we also had African people living in our country. So for me, it was also very, very beautiful. It was a great experience to see that although they're different, they're pretty similar at the same time. Um, when we started this recording, I told you that I started taking dance lessons by the age of 5. Well, the first rhythms I learned how to dance were African rhythms. So witnessing that there directly from the culture for me was also great. I was like, I can tell you, and I normally feel this way. There's a part of myself that is African too. And I knew it by the theory because of what I learned in history lesson, because of what they told me about the conquest and everything. But it's different when you get to experience it. It's there's even dishes that they consider it's typical for them. We have them in Colombia. So then you will see, God, this is really, really small world at the same time. I'm far away from home. It will take me like a day and a half to get back home. But still there are aspects of my culture that I see here, that I find here. Even the way in which some interactions happen in African families are pretty similar to what happens in a Latino family. It's incredible. And that's something you start learning once you get to spend a long time in the place. If you go for a holiday, if you go for a safari, you won't see that. You won't be able to learn that. And that's when you start thinking, okay, so this is something that is also teaching me about my culture. Maybe something, this experience I'm going to tell you, for me, it was eye opening. I'm not sure how familiarized you are with Colombian culture, but there is one specific bus that for us, it's typical from our country. We call it a chiva. It's a bus that is decorated with lots of colors and everything. And normally, when you go as a tourist in Colombia, they give you a trip on a chiva, and they're playing music, and you're having some drinks and everything. It's like the party. It's one of like party type. I grew up with the idea that it was a Colombian typical thing. Guess what? I saw them in Senegal. When I saw them, the emotion I felt, I was telling my son, look, that's a chiva. And he was like, oh, yes. So then we started asking the people, and they told us that that's the buses that they use for normal transportation. That's the type of buses. So then I was telling my son, so we didn't invent the chiva. That was something that was brought. That was something that they learned, and they might have taken it there. This is not Colombian. This is African.
And it's so true with what you said, that like some of these things you would never learn if you just went for a holiday. It's when you like stay in a place for a long period of time, like, you know, living there, that's when you start to realize, you know, not so much like, well, yes, about the culture, but then you start to see more of the similarities, you know, rather than the differences. And I feel like that's just like very important, especially in this time where there's, you know, so much, you know, conflict, and there continues to be hate around the world, to just realize that like, wow, we actually have way more in common than we thought. And places and things that you thought, like you said, you thought were originally were Colombian, it's actually from somewhere else that you thought was so foreign. And then because you saw it there, it's like, oh, this place is not so foreign. You know, it's actually, like you said, it's almost like home because you have those similarities.
Absolutely. It comes also with the food. There are some fruits. There's the star fruit that we know. We know it as a star fruit in English. Well, in Colombia, we call it carambolo. And the word is African. I learned that there because I was showing it to my son and I was telling him, look, carambolos. And then someone said, how do you know that word? And I was like, oh, well, that's the way I call it in my country. And they said, that's the African word that we use for this fruit.
Wow.
To me, it was like every time there was a new discovery, many people kind of disregard Africa, I have to say. But Africa is beautiful. If you ask me, would you ever come back? Yes, definitely. The reason I left was not because I didn't like my life in Africa. I loved every bit of it with the good and the bad things. But it was because I made the decision because of my professional career and because of my son's life experience. I want to make sure he gets a taste of as much as he can before he starts his own way. And if I had the chance of providing that for him, I'm going to do it. But my life in Africa was great. It was beautiful. It was, of course, there's lots of things that you say, okay, but the infrastructure is not nice. Yeah, that's true. If you look at Gabon, and this is really one of the saddest elements in the story, and is being an oil producer. Life standard in Gabon should be better. Of course, I was fortunate because of my job and they provided everything for me. You know, it comes with a package. So then they make sure you stay longer in the place. So they need to make sure you feel comfortable and you have most of what you need at hand. But the real life of a normal citizen, it's really complicated. It's really difficult. And that's the part that to me was kind of heartbreaking. Why is it that this country has so much? Because it's not only the oil. Gabon is this African country that has 13 natural parks. You can't imagine the beauty of those places. I was able to see hippos. I was able to see elephants, crocodiles. It's incredible. So there's lots of things that could benefit the population in a better way, but there's other elements there that, of course, are not allowing people enjoying the resources and the beautiful country they have. They also have wood. There's also great production of wood in the country. So living conditions should be better. And that was the only thing that really broke my heart. But I have to tell you that after living in Africa for 3 years, it was very hard for me to leave. I even faced depression after leaving the post African experience. They told me that was going to happen. I remember a friend of mine told me, once you leave, you need to be prepared, mentally prepared, and be aware that you're going to face depression. After living in Africa, you face depression. You're going to feel that something was taken away from you. And it happened. I couldn't believe it. It happened. That was my first month here in Hanoi. I was going through that. So it was.
Is it because because I guess, like in Africa, they say that's where kind of like everything started. Is it because you kind of
Yeah.
feel connected, like you said, to your roots, to where a lot of things that you thought were Colombian really came from Africa? So you were seeing like the origins and everything. Is that what you were, is that part of it? Why is that depression that comes after you leave Africa?
It's very difficult to describe it because you don't know exactly what it is. But I have to concur with what you said in terms of, I think Africa is the origin of everything. And once you get a touch of that, once you get the sense of it, I feel it leaves like a mark in your spirit, It's, I think that's the point, that to some extent we all belong there. And once you get to experience that, it goes with you anywhere you go. It's always something that you will remember. Something, it's very nice. This story that I'm going to tell you, it's very nice because a friend of mine visited us in Africa. He was the only one who could make it because it was like, it's absolutely expensive to travel around Africa. I have to say that. It's super complicated because we are Colombians, so we needed visa and visa and visa everywhere. And all the bureaucracy around the visa process. Oh, that's therapy. If you ever complain about getting something done, man, you need to live in Africa to understand what it really is like. Um, But we managed to travel, and he was feeling exactly the same. He spent 1 month living with us. He participated as a part of an internship in the school in which I was working. So during the week, he would go and try and work with the kids and guide them a bit into career advisor and this and that and the programs that they're studying, because he also studied that at school. And then during the weekends, we would go to different places. And there was this period of time in which I was in a holiday. So we went to Sao Tome. Sao Tome is a place that no one knows, and it's incredibly beautiful. It's highly recommended if you are that kind of person who are like adventurous and all that. Um, and the day he was leaving, he was depressed to death. And he told me there were 2 weeks in which I was super sad. And this is a person that has traveled the world, and he travels a lot, even a lot more than me. And he told me I couldn't help it. There were 2 weeks in which I felt like I really wanted to go back. I really wanted more of Africa. So I think it has to do with that. The sense that Africa has something in terms of the origin of us all. And I think that's what produces that makes you feel that.
I agree. I think that that's, part like, yeah, that's the reason why that is, and why you have like a strong like pull like to it. But, you lived there for 3 years, and then you eventually got a job in Hanoi, Vietnam, which is where you are now. So how is transitioning from living in Gabon to Vietnam? Because, I feel like, yes, there's major differences, but I'm sure you also noticed some similarities as well.
The process was really, really fast. I actually finished my contract in Gabon, and then they flew me back to Colombia, and I spent 1 month in Colombia, and then I was flying here. So it was really, really fast. My first feeling when I got here is, okay, this is something completely different from what I experienced, because of course, in Gabon, the level of development is quite low, and it's like depending on where you are in the world, it's like 30 or 50 years gap, the level of development. So coming here was like, okay, this is life. Here I have malls, I can go to the movies. That was something I didn't have in Gabon. So there's lots more activities that I can do here. To some extent, I would say that there is more organization in terms of like the style of the city and all that. Although this is not perfect, and I think no place is going to be perfect. But compared to Gabon, it's completely different in the sense that it has a lot more to offer, and you have easy access to most of the things. And compared to Colombia, for example, I have to say that Hanoi offers you a very low cost of life, which is really good. And in terms of the culture, wow, I think that that's something that I'm still in the process of learning, because I've been here only like 8 months, 9 months. So still, I feel I'm in the bubble stage. There's some time in which you don't get to understand the culture that much. In terms of the similarities, I would say that I've sensed some similarities in how sweet the people can be. I'm surprised to see that Vietnamese people are so kind to you many times. That's something that sometimes when you're an expat, the fact that you're not in your element, that you're not at home, makes you a bit aware of everything, and sometimes your guards are up in the sense like, okay, I need to protect myself because I don't know if this person is going to try to do something because they know I'm not from here. But here I've been surprised how sweet and kind they can be, and they do it because it's really from the bottom of their hearts. It's not because they're just trying to play you or something. They're genuine in that sense. I sense that too in Africa. Another similarity is that it takes time for them to relate to you. They like looking at you. That is something I've learned when I was in Africa. Everyone would look at every single detail in me. So they will look at my shoes, they will look at my clothes, they will look at my hair, they will look at my lipstick, at everything. They do here too. So that's a similarity. They're pretty curious.
Yes, they are. They do like to, they do like to stare, and I feel like, that's how it is in many parts of the world where you do, look different. Because I remember of that too in Hanoi, and they're also, like you said, quite curious. They do really want to know, like, kind of like where you're from, just because since you do look different, that's a bit exciting, and they're very like intrigued. But like you said, they do so in a nice way. When I lived in Hanoi, that's what I truly loved about Vietnam, was just like the genuine kindness that you would receive from the locals. And so it really made me feel comfortable right away.
And I see lots of similarities between the Vietnamese and Colombians. They're pretty chatty. Colombians are chatty. They're noisy and they laugh and they're loud. That's what we are too.
Yes, Latinos. Yeah, Latinos were known for being loud, so that I can relate with as well.
And I'm surprised to see how they really enjoy the Latino culture, because you see them dancing salsa in the streets, and for me that's like, oh my god, I love them already.
Yeah, I remember seeing that too a lot. They really love like Latin music, and like you said, you would see salsa in the streets, and it's something that you just wouldn't expect to see like in Asia or like in a place like Vietnam. But that was something, yeah, I would see a lot as well. And like you said, it's a nice surprise, and it makes you love the culture even more, and just really brings you even closer together because you do enjoy, some of the same things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And they feel attracted to the language too. Oh, you speak Spanish, and they try to tell you words and everything. So that's they're pretty welcoming, I have to say. And living here is it's so easy and nice. To me, it's a lot easier because of what I told you. After 3 years of being in a place where there's limited access to many things, being here to me is like heaven. Um, I had no problems at all with for example, the processing of my documents and all that. Everything was perfect. Everything worked out right and in on time. So far, I feel like this would be a place where I would like to stay longer, maybe.
Maybe. I have to ask though, are you driving a motorbike in Hanoi?
Not yet, but my son is about to start his lessons, and then he's going to be. I have designated him as the responsible member of the family for the transportation once he learns.
Oh,
It's crazy. Every time I see the traffic here, people in Colombia complain a lot. Colombia, especially Bogota, you can spend 3 hours in a traffic jam. That is common practice and common situation in Colombia. And people complain a lot about the traffic. But once I saw the traffic here, I was like, those people are in heaven. They don't know what this is like.
yeah, they don't know what real traffic is until you get to Vietnam.
It's like, I don't know if I would be able to drive a motorbike, because then you see them going everywhere. There's some aspects that I don't like about it, and it's, for example, the fact one day I was walking on the street, and then the road was super congested. There was lots of cars and everything, and bikes, and out of the blue, people started taking the sidewalk in their motorbikes. I was like, what is this? They shouldn't be allowed to do that.
I was one of those people.
And I told David, if we do this in Colombia, we are in deep trouble. But then you have to understand, it's part of their culture. It's part of, and although it might sound weird to someone that doesn't have the experience, they know what they're doing. You don't see them driving. They don't drive defensively, like in Colombia, that happens. You need to I remember my dad telling me when I was driving, my dad telling me, you always need to be aware of what the others are doing because you never know what they're going to do. Here, it's completely the opposite. They look at what the others are doing, so then they avoid accidents. I've never witnessed an accident here. There's lots of experts that complain, yeah, but I don't pay attention to those. I just take the positive of the place where I am. That's something I learned. But driving here must be a whole new experience for me.
Yeah, it definitely is. And it was for me. Like when I was there, I had never driven a motorbike before, but I knew moving there that I would have to learn. And, I got a motorbike and I was teaching myself. And it's one of those things that, like you said, it's part of their life, it's part of their culture. And so eventually I too was, driving on the sidewalks and driving on the wrong side of the road. But it's how you get ahead, because if you don't do that, you're not going to get anywhere, because there's so much traffic and there's so many people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you just learn that if you want to get anywhere, that's what you have to do. You have to really be one of the locals. But yeah, obviously I wouldn't do that anywhere else in the world. But in Vietnam, you're in Hanoi, everyone else is doing it. So it's like, why not?
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. Go with the vibe. That's it.
Exactly. So you said you're thinking of staying there for for a longer period of time. So when you say longer, do you want to stay there for at least 3 years, maybe longer? Like what are your thoughts?
So far, what I've been thinking is staying here for 3 years. Initially, I signed a contract for 2 years, but I'm thinking 3 years would be a good time. I actually have another Colombian friend. She's been here already for 5 years and she loves it. She is in love with Vietnam and there's no plans for her to move. And I kind of understand her point in the fact that it's really nice living in here. It's pretty easy living in here. So I might think of extending 3 years, but then I think that after 3 years, I would like to taste another place again. So far, I've already been to Africa. Now it's Asia. Then I don't know what it's going to be for me.
But that makes sense. I mean, it's nice to just kind of have a little like timeline, 3 years. And then once you get there, you can reassess and think, do you want to stay longer, or do you actually want to leave at those 3 years? But yeah, just kind of giving yourself a little bit of time frame, but of course not fully committing to something, because things can change, life can happen, and who knows what you might want to do after 3 years.
Look at what is happening right now. I mean, at this point, yes, here in Vietnam, we're super safe, no casualties because of what has happened or whatever. But anyway, I think that this experience of these pandemics has taught us, like, okay, there's sometimes in life, some your plans can be altered, and then what? At this point, if you ask me, of course, I don't want to leave Vietnam. I feel super safe here. The experience I had was great in terms of how they can deal with the situation. Actually, I was I was in Nha Trang when the lockdown started, the total lockdown started. And we were so scared because it was a group of 5 expats. And they told us the only way that you can come back to Hanoi is if you have a certificate from the doctor saying you don't have COVID. And I was like, what are we going to do? So off we went to the hospital. That was another hilarious experience. 5 expats, all of them looking differently, because we all look different. There's a Mexican girl, 3 Colombians and 1 British guy. So you can imagine the variety of people. And we went to get tested, and the way they treated us, it was impressive. Actually, I had to say, if at that point I was not feeling safe, man, that eased all my troubles, because they were super friendly, super nice. They gave us the test, not that specific test, because they explained to us, listen, you've been here since August. In my case, they told me, you've been here since August. That technically makes you a Vietnamese. So don't worry, we're not going to give you the test. We're just going to run some other tests. And if we see something that we should take care of, then we will proceed. But everything was super easy. So then I thought, do I really want to leave? Of course not. Do I really want to take the risk of traveling to another place and then get stuck in the middle of something? Of course not. So I feel that at this point, Vietnam is one of the safest places I can be. It hurts not going home for the summer, because actually, as part of my contract, I would be able to go during the summer back home. And that's what I usually do. Even when I was in Africa, every summer I would spend 1, 2 months in Colombia and then come back. Uh, but at this point, even if I could, I wouldn't do it. I think the way they're handling situation here is pretty good. It's impressive, I have to say, and I don't want to risk it. So I feel that after all that is happening lately, um, that is teaching us a lesson of many lessons in life for life. But in terms of traveling and everything, it's at this point, I think it's safer to be where we are and just wait for this to happen. I think that over my summer, what I'm going to do is explore the country more because I feel that 2 years are not going to be enough for me to see everything Vietnam has to offer because it's incredible. So I'm going to take that time for exploring the country and enjoying it more of what I've enjoyed so far.
And I love that outlook. And I have to say, I was in Vietnam for a year and a half, and I definitely didn't see everything. So 2 years, you can see a lot, but still, you definitely won't see everything. But I'm glad that you have this positive outlook and making the most of the situation of still continuing to explore, just like you did when you were growing up with your family, exploring Colombia. So I'm really curious to see, where you end up later on. But I mean, for now, it's Vietnam. And so I know you're going to continue to enjoy the country like I know I did. So I just kind of want to, start to wrap up a little. But what advice would you give someone who wanted to go move abroad? What's something that you would tell them that you maybe would have wished that you had known before you moved abroad yourself?
I would say that if that is the plan of a person, they should always be open minded. One should never judge a culture from the perspective of one's own culture. We will always see things that we might disagree with, but when you are an expatriate, you need to be respectful of other cultures. That's something that for me is key. I might disagree with many things, but I'm not in the position of judging. And I'm not in the position of saying if it's right or wrong. That is something that definitely helps a lot. We cannot go places and pretend they're doing things the way we would do them because they have a different history, they have a different journey, and they have their own ways of doing it. Instead, I think we should be, if a person is thinking about living abroad and having this kind of experience, that person needs to be flexible enough to take from that culture what they consider is positive and nurturing for themselves and their personalities, and simply ignore those things that they disagree with, but never engaged into debate or judgments. That is something you should never do. I think you need to be resilient. There are moments of frustration. Yes, there are moments in which you will wish that things were different, or at least the way that you're used to. Maybe you would find a situation in which, but why is it that they don't do it this way? Just embrace it and learn from it and let that frustration shape your personality and make you stronger and more resilient every time. If a person gets to that point, it's going to be a lot easier because although although in my case, for example, being an expatriate with lots of benefits, a lot more benefits than the locals here, I feel it is my duty to be grateful to the place where I am and to be absolutely respectful of what they do and of what I see. Um, and try to learn from them as much as I can. Try to help them if that is their wish. Not teach them or tell them what to do. That's not my position. I always try to be very careful of that. I'm not here to interfere. I'm the one learning here. I'm the one and sharing up to the point that others are willing to receive. but I think we should be most of all respectful and grateful of the position that we are in at the moment.
I love that. I think you couldn't have said any more truer words that, we should be respectful and just being open-minded and learning from that culture, because ultimately that's why I feel like you move abroad, is to learn. And if you want to learn, you need to be open to learning and open to experiences. But Dyana, I just want to say thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for sharing your story. I honestly found it very fascinating to learn about where you grew up and how it was living in, Gabon, and how you're experiencing Hanoi. So thank you so much. It truly means a lot to me.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a great pleasure, and I really enjoyed it too.
For more information on travel and life abroad, go to VentureEtte.com. If you enjoyed this episode, let me know by leaving a review. And be sure to follow me at VentureEtte on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Safe travels, and until next time.